As games continue to progress, new genres are created. First, a game comes out that is completely new from what has been seen before. If that game is successful, clones and games with similar concepts will appear. As developers become more comfortable with the systems in the new genre, staple mechanics are set in place. This is a series that looks at those mechanics, and this is a genre breakdown. Back in the 1980s, there was a computer game named Rogue. The goal of Rogue was simply to get to the bottom floor to retrieve the Amulet of Yendor and make it to the top alive. Movement was grid-based, with every turn having the monsters move as well. Monsters would get harder as you kept going down lower and lower floors, and unlike any other game at the time, every level was randomly generated. This was the game that people have used 30 years later to define the new genre called RogueLikes. RogueLikes vary greatly in base gameplay, but are similar in level design and character progression. Most roguelikes task you with either ascending or descending a series of floors that are randomly generated and increase in difficulty. Your character starts off as a blank slate from floor 1, but gains items and experience that helps the player descend deeper and deeper into the game. But if the player happens to fail and the character dies, the save is then deleted and the player has to start again from a blank slate at floor 1 with a completely new tower. Many people dispute whether roguelikes can be considered a genre, seeing as how many of the games fans put in the same group vary widely with the core gameplay. Spelunky is a platformer, Dungeons of Dreadmore is a grid-centric turn-based RPG, and The Binding of Isaac is a top-down shooter. Yet all of the games are put into the roguelike banner. The reason this happens is that all the games have the same staple mechanics that lend to a certain run-focused gameplay, and all the games outside of the genre don't have this. The same thing can be said for RPG games. The games in the genre also vary widely with the combat system within the game. Mass Effect has third-person shooting, Final Fantasy has mainly turn-based combat, and Kingdom Hearts has a lot of hacking and slashing. But the focus is on world building and the story that drive them into the RPG genre, with just an addendum attached to their classification detailing the combat or exploration that happens within the game. Several games have come out with roguelike attached to their name. The three that I'll be showing greatly vary not only in their method of gameplay, but in how loyal they are to the roguelike name. By viewing the spectrum of these three games, I believe it will be easier to understand what a roguelike truly is. First of the three is Dungeons of Dreadmore, and is the most loyal to the original spirit of Rogue. As a player, you are tasked with descending the 10 floors of Dreadmore and defeating said owner of the dungeon. Your character starts off with 7 chosen traits, or random if you want to, and they can range from basic sword fighting to just being a pirate. All movement in fighting is grid-based, meaning that every turn you take, all monsters also get to move as well. This leads to both highly strategic gameplay and really long play times. I personally average half an hour to an hour on each floor, as the game requires you to think every single step, or you slam your character into every trapped tile in the game and die. And remember that if you die, you have to start off from one floor all over again. This game is also completely insane when it comes to your character's stats and status. The game's theme mixes normal dungeon crawling with absurd humor, as your character can not only be struck with normal, slashing, blunt, and basic elemental damage, but also hurt by ethereal asphyxiation, righteous, and even existential damage. It can get to the point where your attacks do so many types of damage to even fit on the normal character sheet. It'll nicely put a sticky note for the rest on the side. In short, Dungeons of Dreadmore is the original Rogue if it was updated and released in the current time. On the other hand, the next game on the list is pretty far from what I would call a roguelike, but it does have some of the base mechanics that do make up a roguelike, and Rogue is even in the title. That game would be called Rogue Legacy. The basic plot of the game has the player following a lineage of heroes as they are tasked to open a really big door. Plot-wise, there's a lot more going on, but basically the big door shall remain closed until the player has successfully beat the 4 great bosses of the castle. During a single run, the player will find blueprints, runes, and lots of gold until they eventually die. And this is the big issue when it comes to calling Rogue Legacy a roguelike game. The level design is randomly generated, and the difficulty is rock hard, but the character progression, it's completely backwards. In a roguelike game, your character should start off weak and barely able to survive, but as you progress, you'll find items and gain levels that allow you to face the ever-increasing dangers of the dungeon. In Rogue Legacy, you choose from a pool of random characters with their own classes and modifiers. Then after they die, you take the gold you have collected and spend it on permanent bonuses for the next set of characters. Even boss completion is carried into future lives, causing you to not care about certain parts of the castle after you've beaten them. My paladin didn't persevere through danger-filled halls to eventually collect the vampiric armor set, but he inherited from his past lives, who worked their butts off to not even see the benefit for themselves. This mechanic does work wonderfully into the legacy part of Rogue Legacy, but it assassinates the roguelike portion of it. And don't let this rant as me hating the game. I really do recommend it for people who love Castlevania and Metroid games. I even personally have spent several hours having fun with it, but it just isn't a roguelike game to me. Last on the list is a game that not only fulfills the main staples that make up a roguelike, but also keep the smaller details associated with the genre, mainly with its focus on risk management. It also channels this through gameplay separate from a grid-based strategy game, and wraps the package in a lovely grim bow. The game I keep stalling to talk about is The Binding of Isaac, and to say that I'm biased towards this game is an understatement, as I have almost put 300 hours into the game to complete it, and still play it regularly today. The game asks the player to descend floor after floor of Zelda-like dungeons in order to fight back Isaac's crazy mother, who has set him up to be his sacrifice. The Zelda comparisons go further, as all combat is done in 4 directions in a single screen room, with the only difference being that your weapon is not a sword but ranged tears. So how does Binding of Isaac deal with the roguelike checklist? The randomized levels? Check. Permanent death? Check. Is the game difficult? Big check. And how does your character progress? Only within the run. Every box that is on the list is checked, but there are also some small details that also fit into the genre's overall feel. There are several rooms within the game that ask a certain amount of risk from the player. Consumable items like bombs, keys, and money are lightly given to the player after clearing rooms of enemies, and many opportunities come up that ask the player to give up those small amount of resources. Secret rooms that can only be accessed by blowing up walls, shop and item rooms that are sealed with locked doors, and doors that drain life from the player are some examples that show the game is not only hard, but often ask you to sacrifice for even more potential benefit. Not to say that the game is completely slapping you in the face. The Binding of Isaac is not afraid to let you have a completely broken set of items during a single run. The game knows that a run will only last maximum of about an hour, and after that you'll be set back to 0 again. There are even runs that give you nothing and just tell you to deal with it. There is a progress system that happens between runs, but it's progress that complements the roguelike genre. Instead of unlocking things that stay with your characters, even when they start a new run, minus a few exceptions, the things that you unlock are then added to a random pool that you may see in future runs. The player's runs don't become easier, they become more random and expansive. This type of progress is what makes a game like this 10 times more replayable than Rogue Legacy. When you beat the last boss in Rogue Legacy, you've essentially beaten the whole game. You can extend your playtime with a few extra modes and grinding out the last few upgrades, but the runs are so similar and lacking in character progression within the game that it becomes a chore, at least for me. When you beat the final boss in The Binding of Isaac, even after unlocking every ending, the next run could be so different from the last that the wonder of what will show up next really drives home the one more play mentality that is the most attractive quality of roguelikes. Binding of Isaac is one of my favorite roguelike games, and with its rebirth coming ever so quickly, I feel it necessary to send off the original with a countdown to rebirth celebration. What this will include is several more videos including a review of the original game, a few lists of my personal favorite things in the game, and maybe throw in a few playthroughs of the game on Twitch. If you want to keep up with the next few videos, or find out when I finally move on to a different subject, you can subscribe. And this being my first video, feel free to leave any comments to help tweak the format to your liking. Bye-bye!